Jimin laughed when asked who Jungkook's first love was. The answer made the studio silent movie. "Are you sure you want me to answer that?" Jimin laughed, sharp and bright, just as the studio lights flared and the air turned cold, and in that split second Jungkook stopped breathing. The laughter rang too loud for a harmless variety show. It echoed off polished floors, bounced against glass cameras, sliced through the fake cheer taped onto the set. Jungkook sat frozen on his stool, fingers curling into his jeans, pulse hammering so hard it blurred the edges of the room. He could smell the heat of the lights, hear the low electrical hum under the applause track that hadn't played yet, feel the sweat gathering at the base of his neck like a warning. The host grinned, unaware. "It's just a fun question," he said, tapping his cue card. "Who was Jungkook's first love?" Jimin covered his mouth, shoulders shaking as if he couldn't stop laughing, as if the answer were ridiculous. But Jungkook knew that laugh. He had heard it at 3 a.m. in empty practice rooms, brittle and defensive. He had heard it the night before debut, when fear disguised itself as humor. This laugh wasn't joy. It was armor cracking. Jungkook's eyes flicked toward him, a silent plea forming without words. "Don't, not here, not like this." Jimin finally lowered his hand. His smile lingered a fraction too long, stretched thin like glass under pressure. The cameras zoomed in, red lights blinking, hungry. "You really want the truth?" Jimin asked softly. The studio fell into a strange hush, as if even the crew sensed something slipping out of control. Jungkook swallowed. His chest felt tight, memories clawing their way up from years he had buried under discipline and silence. Jimin turned his gaze fully to Jungkook. Not the idol, not the golden Maknae, just him. "It was me." The silence didn't come immediately. It spread slowly, like frost creeping across a window. The host's smile faltered. The audience forgot to breathe. Somewhere backstage, something metallic clattered to the floor, loud as a gunshot in the quiet. Jungkook's mind split in two. One part stayed seated under the lights, posture perfect, expression carefully neutral. The other was dragged backward through time, through corridors that smelled of sweat and instant ramen, through sleepless nights and bruised knees and songs written but never sung. He remembered being 16, heart too big for his ribcage, watching Jimin practice until his feet bled. He remembered the first time Jimin grabbed his wrist, not gentle, not rough, just desperate. Stay. He remembered learning how to love quietly, how to fold feelings into smiles, how to survive. Jimin exhaled, the laugh gone now, replaced by something raw and unguarded. "I thought we were past pretending," he said, not looking at the cameras anymore. "I thought maybe it was time." The producer's voice hissed through the earpieces, urgent and panicked, but Jungkook didn't hear the words. His ears rang. His hands trembled despite years of training that taught him how to control every inch of himself. "Jimin," Jungkook said finally, his voice steady in a way that surprised even him. It carried across the set, low and calm, the sound of someone choosing truth over safety. "This isn't something you joke about." "I wasn't joking," Jimin replied. His eyes shone, not with tears, but with resolve. "I laughed because if I didn't, I'd break." The host cleared his throat, glancing nervously at the cameras. "Well, this is unexpected," he said weakly. Jungkook stood. The movement was small, but it shifted the entire room. Chairs scraped. The audience gasped. He stepped closer to Jimin, close enough to feel his warmth, close enough to remember how it felt to stand like this years ago when no one was watching. "You promised," Jungkook whispered, a single sentence heavy with history. "I promised to protect you," Jimin answered just as quietly. "Not the secret." For a moment, Jungkook hated him for that. Hated the way Jimin always chose fire over ice, honesty over comfort. Then he hated himself for still loving him for it. The years had carved Jungkook into something careful. Fame had taught him how quickly love could turn into a weapon. He feared exposure, feared the past being twisted into scandal, feared losing the fragile peace he had built. But deeper than fear was exhaustion. The constant hiding, the half-truths, the ache of a love that never truly ended, only went silent. Jungkook turned to the cameras. His reflection stared back at him from the lens, eyes darker than he remembered. "People think first love is innocent," he said slowly. "They think it's something you grow out of." His gaze flicked back to Jimin. "Sometimes it's the thing that teaches you how to survive." Jimin's breath hitched. "No more questions," Jungkook added, firm now. "This isn't a story for entertainment." The host nodded too quickly. The director signaled to cut. The red lights dimmed. Sound returned all at once, voices, movement, chaos, but the moment had already been carved into everyone present. Backstage, the air felt cooler. The walls smelled faintly of cleaning spray and old cables. Jimin leaned against a concrete pillar, hands shaking now that the performance was over. "I'm sorry," he said, "and I'm not." Jungkook studied him, really looked, noticing the familiar habits that never changed. The way Jimin chewed the inside of his cheek when nervous, the way his shoulders squared when he decided something mattered more than comfort. "I don't know what happens next," Jungkook said. Jimin nodded. "Neither do I." They stood there, two people bound by a past that refused to stay buried, the truth finally spoken without disguises or laughter. There was no neat resolution, no dramatic embrace, no music swelling in the background. Just the quiet understanding that something irreversible had begun, not with a confession of love, but with the courage to stop lying. And for the first time in years, Jungkook felt strangely light, as if the silence that once protected him had finally loosened its grip. The hallway outside the studio throbbed with noise, managers arguing in hushed but urgent voices, stylists frozen mid-step, phones already buzzing with notifications they weren't supposed to check yet, and Jungkook walked straight through it all like a man moving underwater. "Jungkook, wait," Jimin called, his voice cracking just enough to slice through the chaos. Jungkook stopped but didn't turn around. His jaw was tight, his back straight, every muscle trained to hold together even when the inside was splintering. "Not here," he said quietly. "If you have anything else to say it somewhere without walls that listen." Jimin followed him anyway. They ended up in a small practice room that smelled of dust and old sweat, mirrors lining one wall, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Jungkook shut the door harder than necessary. The click of the lock sounded final. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Their reflections stared back at them, distorted by years and fame and everything unsaid. "You blindsided me," Jungkook said at last, his voice low, dangerous in its calm. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "Yes," Jimin answered immediately. "That's why I did it." Jungkook laughed then, sharp and humorless. "You call that protection?" "I call it survival," Jimin shot back. "I'm tired of pretending that part of our lives never happened. I'm tired of watching you flinch every time someone gets too close." Jungkook turned on him so fast Jimin barely had time to brace himself. "You think this is about comfort?" Jungkook snapped. "This is about consequences. This is about contracts and careers and fans who think they own pieces of us." "And what about us?" Jimin demanded. His voice rose, echoing off the mirrors. "Do we just erase ourselves forever because it's convenient?" Silence slammed down between them. Jungkook dragged a hand through his hair, packing once, twice, like a caged animal. "You don't understand what it's like for me," he said. "I learned early that love is something you pay for. Every mistake sticks to you forever." Jimin stepped closer. "I understand exactly," he said. "I just refuse to let fear decide everything." Jungkook stopped packing. His eyes were dark now, raw. "You laughed," he said. "You laughed before you said it. Do you know what that did to me?" Jimin swallowed. "I laughed because I was terrified, because once the words were out, there was no taking them back." Jungkook looked at him for a long moment, then turned away, staring at their reflections. "You were my first love," he said quietly, as if admitting it out loud changed its shape. "And my first lesson in loss." Jimin's breath shuddered. "I never left because I stopped loving you." "No," Jungkook replied. "You left because loving me hurt." "That doesn't mean it stopped," Jimin said. Outside the room, a manager knocked once, sharp and urgent. "We need you both, now." Jungkook didn't move. "Tell them we're not ready." There was hesitation, then retreating footsteps. The room felt smaller, charged. Years of restraint pressed against the present moment, threatening to crack it open. "You don't get to decide when the truth comes out," Jungkook said, softer now. "You don't get to drop it on me like that." Jimin nodded slowly. "Then tell me when," he said, "because I can't keep carrying it alone." Jungkook closed his eyes. Memories surged uninvited. Hands brushing in the dark, whispered promises drowned out by practice music, the night they decided silence was safer than honesty. "When you said my name like that," Jungkook murmured, "on camera, it felt like you were pulling me back into a life I buried." Jimin's voice broke. "I never buried it." Jungkook opened his eyes. There was anger there, but also grief, and something dangerously close to longing. "This changes everything," he said. "Good," Jimin replied. Everything needed changing. They stood inches apart, not touching, the space between them heavier than any embrace. Whatever came next, scandal, backlash, fallout, it no longer mattered in the same way. The truth had been spoken, and it refused to go back into hiding. Jungkook exhaled slowly. "If this destroys us," he said, "I need you to understand I won't forgive you easily." Jimin met his gaze, unwavering. "If it frees us," he answered, "I'll accept whatever it costs." For the first time since the studio fell silent, Jungkook didn't look away. The news broke before they even left the building. Jungkook found out when his phone began vibrating nonstop in his pocket, a relentless pulse that matched the tension coiled in his chest. He didn't need to look to know what it was. The truth never waited politely. It ran ahead of you, screaming. "Don't," Jimin said when Jungkook finally pulled the phone out. "Not yet." Jungkook ignored him. The screen was a flood of headlines, half-formed sentences, clipped video thumbnails frozen on Jimin's face mid-laugh, on Jungkook's stunned stillness. Speculation wrapped in certainty. Shock sold as insight. He exhaled slowly. "They cut it wrong." "They always do," Jimin replied bitterly. By the time they reached the van, the air outside felt hostile, flashing lights already beginning to gather like predators sensing blood. Managers barked orders, doors slammed, engines roared to life, but none of it drowned out the weight pressing between them. Inside the van, the silence was worse. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Jungkook said at last, staring out the window as the city blurred past. "They're not hearing what we meant, they're hearing what they want." Jimin leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And what did you want, Jungkook? For it to stay locked forever?" "I wanted control," Jungkook snapped, turning to face him. "I wanted to choose how, when, and if anyone ever knew." Jimin's eyes flashed. "You had years to choose." "That wasn't fair," Jungkook said, voice rising. "You know why I couldn't." "I know why you didn't," Jimin shot back. "And I respected it until it started killing you." The van hit a bump, jolting them both. Jungkook laughed under his breath, sharp and strained. "You think this saves me? Look at this." He shoved the phone toward Jimin. "They're dissecting every glance, every breath. They're turning something real into entertainment." Jimin didn't look away. "They always would have," he said. "The difference is now you're not alone in it." Jungkook recoiled slightly. "You don't get to decide that for me." Jimin's voice softened, but it carried an edge that cut deeper. "I decided I couldn't watch you disappear anymore." The van slowed to a stop. Underground parking. Shadows swallowed them as the doors slid open. The building above loomed, concrete and glass, a fortress and a cage. Inside Jungkook's apartment, the quiet felt artificial, padded, as if the walls were designed to absorb screams. He kicked off his shoes, packing immediately, restless energy crackling under his skin. "You crossed a line," he said, finally stopping in front of Jimin. "Do you understand that?" "Yes," Jimin answered without hesitation, "and I would do it again." The words landed hard. Jungkook stared at him, incredulous. "You're unbelievable." "No," Jimin said, stepping closer. "I'm honest, there's a difference." Jungkook laughed again, but this time it wavered. "Honesty doesn't protect us." "Neither does silence," Jimin replied. "It just rots you from the inside." Jungkook's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him all at once. He sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, head bowed. "I was 17, he said quietly. "I didn't even know how to want things without being afraid." Jimin's throat tightened. "I know. You were the first person who made me feel seen," Jungkook continued. "And the first person I thought I'd lose everything for." Jimin knelt in front of him, close but not touching. "I never wanted to be the thing that scared you." "You weren't," Jungkook whispered. "The world was." They sat there, breathing the same air, the past unraveling between them in fragile strands. A sudden buzz shattered the moment. Jungkook's phone lit up again, this time with a message that made his blood run cold. "Emergency meeting, now." Jimin saw his expression change. "What is it?" "They're panicking," Jungkook said flatly. "And when they panic, they make decisions for us." Jimin stood, jaw tightening. "Then let's not let them." Jungkook looked up at him, something fierce igniting behind his eyes. "You started this without asking me," he said. "If we do this next part, we do it together." Jimin nodded. Together. The meeting room was cold, all glass and steel, faces lined with concern and calculation. Words like risk and image and damage control flew around them, sharp and impersonal. Jungkook listened until he couldn't anymore. "No," he said, cutting through the noise. The room stilled. "We're not issuing a denial," Jungkook continued, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "And we're not pretending nothing happened." A manager frowned. "Jungkook, think carefully." "I am," Jungkook interrupted. "For the first time, I am." Jimin glanced at him, surprise flickering across his face, followed by something dangerously close to pride. "This story isn't a scandal," Jungkook said. "It's a truth, and I won't let it be twisted into something shameful." Silence followed, heavy and uncertain. When they finally left the room, the night had deepened, city lights glittering like fractured stars. Jungkook stepped outside, the cool air filling his lungs. Jimin joined him, standing close. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Jungkook said, "I did." He turned to Jimin, eyes searching. "You said you couldn't carry it alone anymore." Jimin nodded. "Neither can I," Jungkook said. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. The space between them felt different now, not empty, but charged with possibility and fear and something fragile that refused to die. Above them, cameras waited, stories already forming, but for the first time, Jungkook didn't feel like running. The silence they'd lived in for years was finally broken, and whatever came next, it would be loud, messy, and undeniably real. The morning came without mercy. Jungkook woke to the sound of his phone ringing endlessly, not vibrating this time, but screaming across the nightstand like an alarm he couldn't silence. Sunlight cut through the curtains, too bright, too ordinary for a world that had already shifted overnight. Jimin was still there, sitting on the edge of the couch where he had never slept, elbows on his knees, hair messy, eyes red but alert. He looked like someone who had been waiting for impact. "You should answer it," Jimin said quietly. Jungkook stared at the ceiling for a moment, breathing through the tightness in his chest, then grabbed the phone. The voice on the other end was clipped, controlled, already exhausted. "There's a statement drafted," the manager said. "You need to approve it immediately." Jungkook closed his eyes. "What does it say?" A pause. That it was a misunderstanding, a joke taken out of context. Jungkook sat up so fast the room spun. "No." "Jungkook," the voice warned, "this is getting out of hand. Fans are divided. Sponsors are asking questions." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "Then let them ask." The line went quiet. Somewhere behind the phone, a decision was being weighed, numbers against people, image against truth. "You're making this very difficult," the manager finally said. "I know," Jungkook replied. He ended the call before the guilt could be weaponized. The room felt heavy. Jimin stood slowly. "You didn't have to do that." Jungkook laughed softly, rubbing his face. "I'm tired of being easy to manage." Jimin watched him, something unreadable passing through his eyes. "You're shaking." Jungkook looked down and realized it was true. His hands trembled, betraying everything he'd tried to keep buried. "I'm not scared of them," he said. "I'm scared of what happens if I stop hiding." Jimin stepped closer, close enough that Jungkook could smell his shampoo, familiar and grounding. "You don't disappear when people see you," Jimin said. "You just become real." The words hit harder than any accusation. By noon, the internet was on fire. Clips looped endlessly, slowed down, zoomed in. Jungkook's silence was dissected frame by frame. Jimin's laugh became a battleground. They watched it together on mute, the world arguing about their lives without ever asking them. "They're saying you used me," Jungkook said suddenly, eyes fixed on the screen. "That you did it for attention." Jimin's lips pressed together. "Let them." "No," Jungkook snapped, turning to him. "I won't." Jimin raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you fight comments?" "Since they're trying to turn you into a villain," Jungkook replied. "Since they're acting like what we had was manipulation instead of whatever it was." Jimin's voice dropped. "Love." The word hung between them, terrifying in its simplicity. Jungkook didn't answer right away. His chest felt tight, but not with fear, with recognition. "It was," he said finally. "It still is in ways I don't know how to fix." Jimin let out a shaky breath. "Then say it." Jungkook looked at him sharply. "Say it where?" "Out there," Jimin said, gesturing vaguely toward the unseen world. "Not everything, not details, just the truth." Jungkook shook his head. "You don't understand what that would do." "I do," Jimin replied fiercely, "and I'm willing to burn with you." The words ignited something volatile in Jungkook. "This isn't a movie," he said. "You don't get a beautiful ending just because you're brave." Jimin's eyes glistened. "I'm not asking for beautiful, I'm asking for honest." The knock at the door was sharp, insistent. Security, more meetings, more pressure. Jungkook exhaled slowly, then straightened. "If I do this," he said, "it's not for the public. It's because I refuse to keep pretending you were nothing." Jimin nodded, eyes softening. "That's enough." The press conference room buzzed with anticipation, microphones clustered like weapons. Jungkook felt every step as he walked in, Jimin just behind him, a silent presence he could feel even without looking. Flashes exploded. Questions were shouted. Jungkook sat, heart pounding, then raised a hand. "I'll speak," he said. The room quieted. "What happened on that show wasn't scripted," Jungkook continued, voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "It wasn't a joke, and it wasn't a scandal." He paused, eyes flicking briefly to Jimin. "It was a moment where something real slipped through. Something I've spent years hiding, because I was taught that honesty could destroy everything I worked for." A murmur rippled through the room. "I won't explain it away," Jungkook said, "and I won't apologize for caring about someone deeply." The silence was electric. Jimin's breath caught. He hadn't expected this, not all of it. Jungkook stood. "That's all." They left without taking questions, hearts racing, adrenaline flooding their veins. Outside, the air felt colder, sharper, alive. In the car, neither spoke at first. Then Jimin laughed softly, incredulous. "You really did that?" Jungkook leaned his head back, eyes closed. "I don't know if it was the right choice." Jimin looked at him, emotion breaking through his carefully held composure. "It was the bravest." Jungkook turned to him, something like relief washing over his face. "I'm still scared." Jimin reached out, this time not stopping himself, fingers brushing Jungkook's sleeve, grounding, real. "So am I." They sat there, hands close but not fully entwined, facing a future that was no longer quiet or safe, but finally, undeniably theirs. The backlash didn't arrive like a wave. It arrived like shrapnel. Jungkook felt it the moment he stepped out of the car, the air thick with shouted names and flashing lights, questions hurled like accusations. Security moved fast, but not fast enough to block the words that cut through him. "Was it real? Are you coming out? Did you lie to your fans?" Jimin's hand brushed his back, brief but steady. "Keep walking," he murmured. Inside the building, the doors slammed shut, sealing the noise outside, but the tension followed them in like smoke. Jungkook leaned against the wall, chest rising and falling too fast. "They're tearing you apart online," a staff member said hesitantly, phone glowing in her hand. "Both of you." Jungkook laughed under his breath. "At least they're honest about it." Jimin turned sharply. "This isn't funny." "I know," Jungkook said, his voice cracked despite himself. "That's why I'm smiling." They were ushered into another room, smaller, dimmer. A single table, 2 chairs. It felt like an interrogation space more than a meeting room. A senior executive entered without greeting them. "You put us in an impossible position," he said flatly. Jungkook straightened. "I spoke the truth." "You spoke half a truth," the executive shot back. "Which is worse, now everyone wants the rest." Jimin crossed his arms. "So what's the plan? Silence us again." The executive's gaze hardened. "We protect the brand." Jungkook's jaw clenched. "I am not a brand." The room went still. "You forget," the executive said slowly. "Everything you have exists because of the system you're now threatening." Jungkook stood. "And you forget I'm the one standing in front of the cameras bleeding for it." Jimin stepped in instinctively. "This isn't damage control anymore. This is about dignity." The executive scoffed. "Dignity doesn't sell." Jungkook laughed, sharp and bitter. "Neither does fear, not forever." A long silence followed, heavy with calculation. Finally, the executive spoke again. "You will not make any further statements, either of you." Jimin shook his head. "You can't stop what's already happening." "We can," the executive said, "if we need to." Jungkook felt something inside him snap, clean and final. "Then do it," he said. "End me, cancel me, whatever you want, but I'm not taking back what I said." Jimin's breath caught. "Jungkook." "No," Jungkook interrupted softly, eyes burning. "I've spent my whole life shrinking myself to fit someone else's comfort. I'm done." The executive stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time not as an asset, but as a threat. "You're making an enemy of the very people who kept you safe." Jungkook replied quietly, "I was never safe." They left without permission. Outside, night had fallen fully, neon lights blurring into streaks of color as rain began to fall, thin and cold. Jungkook stood under the awning, hands shaking again, the adrenaline finally crashing. Jimin turned to him, eyes fierce and wet. "You didn't have to say all that." "Yes," Jungkook said, breathing hard. "I did." Jimin's voice dropped. "If this ruins you." Jungkook cut him off. "It won't. What ruined me was pretending you didn't matter." The words landed between them, heavy and fragile. Jimin laughed shakily. "You're terrifying right now." Jungkook managed a small smile. "You started it." They moved closer, the rain masking their breaths, the city loud enough to hide 1,000 confessions. Jimin hesitated, then spoke, voice trembling. "I left because I thought loving you meant hurting you." Jungkook swallowed. "And I stayed silent because I thought loving you meant losing everything." Jimin's eyes searched his. "And now?" Jungkook stepped closer, rain soaking his hair, his clothes, his defenses. "Now I think loving you means choosing you, even if it's messy." For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just them. Then Jungkook's phone buzzed violently again. He checked the screen, his face draining of color. Jimin noticed immediately. "What is it?" Jungkook looked up slowly. "Someone leaked something." "Leaked what?" Jungkook's voice was barely audible. "Us, from years ago." Jimin felt the ground shift under his feet. "What do you mean, us?" Jungkook turned the screen toward him. A grainy photo. 2 silhouettes in a practice room. Too close, too intimate, impossible to deny. Jimin's breath broke. "That was private." "I know," Jungkook whispered, "and now it's everywhere." The rain intensified, pounding against concrete, washing the city in chaos. Jimin closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, resolve hardening. "They wanted a scandal," Jimin said. "Now they have one." Jungkook's hands trembled again. "This is bigger than anything we planned." Jimin reached out, gripping Jungkook's wrist tightly, grounding him. Then we stopped planning. Jungkook met his gaze, fear and fire colliding. You're not afraid. I am, Jimin said honestly, but I'm more afraid of losing you to silence again. Jungkook exhaled, something fierce settling into his bones. Then whatever happens next. We face it, Jimin finished. Together. Above them, screens across the city lit up with their past, their truth twisted into spectacle. And for the first time, instead of running, Jungkook stood still, rain-soaked, exposed, and unafraid to be seen. The leak detonated faster than any rumor ever had. By the time Jungkook and Jimin reached the apartment, every screen in the room seemed to glow with the same image, paused at the same unforgiving moment. Two boys in a practice room, too close to be coincidence, too intimate to explain away. The grainy blur didn't soften it. It sharpened it. It stripped years of denials bare. Jungkook dropped his phone onto the table like it burned. They didn't just leak a picture, he said, voice hollow. They stole a memory. Jimin stood frozen, staring at the screen as if it might disappear if he didn't blink. That night, he murmured. You remember, you couldn't sleep. You said the walls felt like they were closing in. Jungkook's throat tightened. You stayed until morning. I promised I wouldn't leave, Jimin said. His voice wavered. I kept that promise, just not in the way you needed. Jungkook turned sharply. Don't do that. Don't rewrite it like you abandoned me. Jimin flinched. I did abandon you. No, Jungkook snapped. You disappeared to protect me. That's not the same thing. Jimin laughed bitterly. Tell that to 17-year-old you, staring at your phone every night. The words hit hard. Jungkook looked away, pain flickering across his face. You think I didn't know why you left, he said quietly. I just hated that you decided for both of us. Jimin stepped closer, heat rising between them. And you think I didn't hate myself for it? I watched you smile on stage while breaking backstage. I told myself it was necessary. Necessary for who? Jungkook shot back. For them, for the image. For you, Jimin said fiercely. For the boy who shook when people touched him, who thought love was a weakness he couldn't afford. Jungkook's breath hitched. You don't get to claim you knew me better than I knew myself. I knew you when you didn't, Jimin replied. When you thought pain was normal. Silence slammed down, thick and suffocating. The door buzzer shattered it, relentless, demanding. Jungkook stiffened. Don't answer. It's already here, Jimin said softly. They watched the security monitor together. Reporters, management, faces tight with urgency and fear. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling over. They don't care about the truth. They care about control. Jimin's jaw set. Then we take it back. Jungkook turned to him sharply. How? By refusing to be ashamed, Jimin said. By saying what that photo actually is. Jungkook shook his head. If I say it out loud, there's no undoing it. There never was, Jimin replied. You just pretended there was. The buzzer sounded again, longer this time. Jungkook closed his eyes, then opened them with something resolved burning behind them. If I do this, he said, you don't step back. Jimin didn't hesitate. I won't. They opened the door together. The room filled instantly with voices, overlapping, urgent. Questions flew before greetings could form. We need a response now. Stocks are dropping. Fans are fighting each other. Jungkook raised a hand. Enough. The room stilled, startled. That photo, Jungkook said, his voice calm in a way that frightened even himself, is from a time when we were young and scared and learning how to survive in a world that didn't allow mistakes. A manager interjected sharply. Jungkook, be careful. I am being careful, Jungkook said, cutting him off. Careful with my life. Jimin stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. It wasn't staged. It wasn't manipulation. It wasn't a scandal. It was love, Jungkook said, the word landing with quiet force. And love isn't something I'll apologize for. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone swore under their breath. The manager's face drained of color. Do you understand what you're doing? Yes, Jungkook replied. For the first time, yes. Jimin's hand brushed his, grounding steady. This doesn't erase fear, Jungkook continued. It doesn't solve everything, but it ends the lie. Silence followed, heavy and stunned. When they were finally alone again, the apartment felt different, as if the walls had shifted outward, giving them room to breathe. Jungkook sank onto the couch, exhaustion crashing over him. Jimin sat beside him, close but not crowding. You didn't have to say it like that. Jungkook laughed weakly. I didn't plan to say it at all. Jimin's voice softened. Are you okay? Jungkook stared at his hands. I don't know, but I feel lighter, terrified but lighter. Jimin nodded. That's what truth does, it hurts before it heals. Jungkook turned to him, eyes searching. Do you regret it, coming back into this with me? Jimin shook his head, tears finally spilling. I regret every day I chose silence over you. Jungkook's chest tightened. He reached out, fingers curling into Jimin's sleeve, anchoring himself. Then don't choose it again. I won't, Jimin whispered. Outside, the world continued to argue, to judge, to demand answers. Inside, two people sat together, bruised but unbroken, having finally named the thing that shaped them. Whatever came next wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest. The night stretched on quietly after that, not because the world had calmed down, but because Jungkook and Jimin had finally stopped running. The city outside the windows glowed with restless energy, sirens distant, screens still flashing their names. But inside the apartment, there was only the soft hum of electricity and the sound of two people breathing in the same space without fear of what it meant. Jungkook stood by the window for a long time, watching rain trace slow paths down the glass. His reflection stared back at him, older than he felt, younger than the life he had been forced to live. Jimin watched him from the couch, recognizing the posture immediately, the way Jungkook always looked when his thoughts became too heavy to carry alone. You're thinking about the end, Jimin said gently. Jungkook didn't turn around. I'm thinking about the beginning, he replied. About how small we were, how everything felt impossible and infinite at the same time. Jimin joined him at the window, close enough that their shoulders brushed. The contact was simple, unguarded. We survived, he said. Barely, Jungkook answered. And I hated you for leaving, and I loved you for it, both at the same time. Jimin's voice trembled. I hated myself more than you ever could. Jungkook finally faced him. His eyes were tired but clear. I don't want to hate anymore. Jimin swallowed hard. Neither do I. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they had lost and everything they still might build. Jungkook reached out slowly, giving Jimin time to pull away if he wanted to. Jimin didn't. Their hands met, fingers interlacing like muscle memory, like something their bodies had never forgotten even when their lives tried to. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, Jungkook said quietly. I don't know who stays, who leaves, what this costs. Jimin squeezed his hand. But you know who you are. Jungkook nodded. And who you are. Jimin's eyes filled again, but this time his smile didn't break. I'm not asking for promises, he said. Just honesty, even when it's ugly. Jungkook let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. That might be the hardest promise of all. Then let it be the only one, Jimin replied. Morning came slowly, not with peace but with clarity. Statements would be released. Contracts would be rewritten or torn apart. Some fans would walk away, others would stay. The world would keep arguing, analyzing, demanding. But Jungkook didn't feel hollow when he thought about it anymore. As the sun rose, painting the room in pale gold, Jungkook rested his forehead against Jimin, eyes closing. I spent years thinking love was the thing that would destroy me, he murmured. Jimin whispered back, and I spent years thinking letting go was the only way to save you. Jungkook smiled, small but real. Turns out the truth was somewhere in between. They stayed like that, not hiding, not performing, not explaining. Just two people who had finally chosen to live out loud, even if their voices shook. Outside, the world would remember this moment as a scandal, a controversy, a turning point. But for Jungkook and Jimin, it would always be something simpler. The moment silence stopped owning them,